ما هو طيب زيادة يعني نفل ليست الفرض الأول، هذا كله بقى سنة. فهمت؟ ما شاء الله، أهلا وسهلا، بارك الله فيك، جزاك الله خيرا.
There's not enough sleep for everybody this time. So I apologize. I was not prepared for this.
We got some here. Elias.
You guys want to sleep?
Yeah, yo. It's not as good as yours, but
No.
something to wet their beaks. بإذن الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، صلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا وإمامنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So tonight's lesson will be on al-Lu'lu wal-Marjan فيما اتفق عليه الشيخان. We're going to be discussing chapter number 50 from Kitab al-Hajj. The author rahimahullah states, باب رمي جمرة العقبة من بطن الوادي وتكون مكة عن يساره ويكبر مع كل حصاة. حديث عبد الله بن مسعود عن عبد الرحمن بن يزيد قال رمى عبد الله من بطن الوادي فقلت يا أبا عبد الرحمن إن الناس يرمونها من فوقها، فقال والذي لا إله غيره هذا مقام الذي أنزلت عليه سورة البقرة صلى الله عليه وسلم. حديث عبد الله بن مسعود عن الأعمش قال سمعت الحجاج يقول على المنبر السورة التي يذكر فيها البقرة والسورة التي يذكر فيها آل عمران والسورة التي يذكر فيها النساء. قال فذكرت ذلك لإبراهيم فقال حدثني عبد الرحمن بن يزيد أنه كان مع ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه حين رمى جمرة العقبة فاستبطن الوادي حتى يحاذ بالشجرة اعترضها فمر بسبع حصيات يكبر مع كل حصاة ثم قال من ها هنا والذي لا إله غيره قام الذي أنزلت عليه سورة البقرة. Chapter 50 says stoning of Jamratul Aqaba from the middle of the valley while keeping Mecca on the left side and saying takbir over each throwing of a pebble. Hadith number 816 is narrated Abdurrahman bin Yazid, Abdullah bin Mas'ud did the Rami from the middle of the valley. So I said, oh Abu Abdurrahman, some people stone the Jamrah from above it. He said, by him except whom none has the right to be worshipped, this is the place from where the one whom Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed did the Rami. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Hadith 817 is narrated Amash, I heard Al-Hajjaj saying on the pulpit, the surah in which Al-Baqarah is mentioned, and the surah in which the family of Imran is mentioned, and the surah in which the women An-Nisa is mentioned. I mentioned this to Ibrahim, and he said, Abdurrahman ibn Yazid told me, I was with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud when he did the stoning of Jamrat al-Aqaba. He went down the middle of the valley, and when he came near the tree, he stood opposite to it and threw 7 small pebbles and said, Allahu Akbar. With every throwing of pebble, then he said, by him except whom none has the right to be worshipped. Here is the place, or here at this place stood the one on whom Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed. So these 2 hadiths in this chapter discuss one of the details of Hajj, one of the polishings of one's Hajj, and that is the specific recommended pinpoint location of making the Rami, of stoning the Aqaba Jamrah. That is recommended to stone it at this specific point, and this is where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it. So therefore, stoning at Aqaba, stoning the Jamrat, the Aqaba Jamrah, is one issue. How to do it specifically, the polished sunnah of your Hajj, that's what's being discussed in this chapter heading. Everyone understand that? And as we've explained before, to learn how to make Hajj properly, you're going to gather and combine all things. You're going to study the fiqh of the Hajj from the fiqh books, smallest to biggest, of course. And you're going to read the hadiths on Hajj as well, let alone the ayat pertaining to Hajj, and you merge them together. And you put together, or you have someone else put together for you, a structure, a skeleton of Hajj. The shurut, the conditions of Hajj, things that have nothing to do with the actual Hajj itself, but things that come before the Hajj, that have to be there, and if not, no Hajj. And after the shurut, the arkan, the bones of the Hajj, things that are absolutely necessary and mandatory, but they're actually a part of the Hajj. And then the wajibat of Hajj, things that are mandatory, but if you forgot or you couldn't do it, there's a way of repairing it. And then you learn the recommended acts of Hajj, something that you don't have to do. It's not obligatory, it's not mandatory, but it's a means of polishing. You're glazing and icing your cake, correct? Let's not talk about swords tonight, okay? Polishing swords, steel, violence, killing. Let's talk about something good and enjoyable. Cakes, donuts. You can go to a Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts or any other donut shop and say, I'll take an old-fashioned donut. Old-fashioned donut has how much icing on it? None. Is it sweet? Is it edible? You can have it with your coffee, you can have it with your tea, etc. That's fine, that's acceptable. Rather, that's the salaf of donuts. Now, old-fashioned, the original donuts. And if you want some extra, something more, then you get glazed, chocolate frosted, blueberry cake, raspberry filled, powder, blah, 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 blah. There are levels. But the basic standard mandatory asal of the donut is a circular round piece of dough, fried, that has some sweetness in it. Right? So the shurut of the donut, it has to be what? Made of dough. It's not going to be pretzel, correct? Or tortilla, right? It's not going to be made just from all sugar. It's not going to be a round thing of sugar. It has to be what? Dough. Correct or incorrect? Then it has to be what? It doesn't have to be in a circle. It may sound bow tie. Right? But you get the point I'm trying to make. Right? Does it have to have a hole in the middle? Huh? Not necessarily. Right? Powdered donuts, jelly donuts don't have holes. Does it have to have frosting on it? Does it have to have glaze icing? Does it have to have this? Does it have to have that? No. All of those things are what? Additional. Right? They're additional. So the Hajj has the basic conditions. The Hajj has the what? Prerequisites, the arkan, and the wajibat. And then after that, and the top of that are things which you should learn in order to do what? Polish your Hajj, to make it the best Hajj. And inshallah, that's all a part of Hajj Mabrur. That's all a part of what? Hajj Mabrur, a complete baked cake. The baker says it's done. Nothing else is to be added. I decorated this, I cut this, I put the cream on top with the little thingies on the side, the design, the sprinkles, it's khalas, finished, over. Everyone understand this? Even though you can eat it without those things. And you can also serve it without those things. Different types of cake, they don't have those extra things. And this fiqh is extremely useful when you're making Hajj with millions of people and with groups and with a brother whose ankles are swollen or a sister who's pregnant, or a brother who's in a wheelchair, or your feet are aching, you have bunions and corns, your feet are about to fall off, you've been walking so much, I can't make it there on time at 12 a.m. I can't do this. I can't go and kiss it, or that's fine because you don't what? Have to. And if you do have the ability, then you what? You should. You don't have to get there by 12 a.m., you can make it there by kada. You can do it the next day. or push come to shove, certain things in which you say, I have to pay the expiation, so on and so forth. No one realizes the importance of understanding what is and what isn't, what has to be done, etc., except for one who's out there in the field, making Hajj when all of those things take place in all those conditions. Khair inshallah, and that's when the Prophet ﷺ tells us, Man yurid la ya akhi, la yajuz, la yajuz, la yajuz, la yajuz. That's unlawful. You can't do that, ya akhi. La, copyright, infringement. Barakallahu feek. You gotta get rid of that, huh? Tayyib. What's important is, al-muhim, is that the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us, Man yuridillahu bihi khayran, yufaqihu fi din. When Allah wants good for a servant, He does what? He gives him understanding of the religion. And that's fiqh fi din. And one day you may be leading a Hajj group, and there are people telling you have to do this, your Hajj is no good if you don't do that, you have to go back right now, you have to stone it like this, you have to throw it like this, you have to cut the hair like this, you have to cut this amount of hair, that hair has to be... And the one who has fiqh is going to say, what? La yalzam. That's not mandatory, that's recommended, so on and so forth. Khairan inshallah. So that's what chapter number 50 is what? Speaking on. That's what chapter number 50 is speaking on. Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says regarding this chapter, فيه فوائد منها إثبات رمي جمرة العقبة يوم النحر وهو مجمع عليه وهو واجب وهو أحد أسباب التحلل وهي ثلاثة رمي جمرة العقبة يوم النحر فطواف الإفاضة مع سعيه ولم يكن سعى أو إن لم يكن سعى والثالث الحلق عند من يقول إنه أو أنه نسك وهو الصحيح فلو ترك رمي جمرة العقبة حتى فاتت أيام التشريق فحجه صحيح وعليه دم. هذا قول الشافعي والجمهور. وقال بعض أصحاب مالك الرمي ركن لا يصح الحج إلا به. وحكى ابن جرير عن بعض الناس أن رمي الجمار إنما شرع حفظا للتكبير ولو تركه كبر أجزاؤه ونحو ذلك. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها وصحيح المشهور ما قدمناه ومنها كون الرمي 7 حصيات وهو مجمع عليه ومن استحباب التكبير مع كل حصاة وهو مذهبنا ومذهب مالك والعلماء كافة. No, he says about this chapter, he says there are fawaid, many benefits. Benefit number 1 is the legality of stoning the Aqaba Jamrah. And the Aqaba Jamrah being stoned on the 10th day, Yawmun Nahar. And this is agreed upon by all of the ulama. Is that it's from the sunnah, it's from the deen, that's what's supposed to be done on the 10th day. And it is wajib, it's mandatory. Not a shart of Hajj, not a rukn of Hajj, but he says what? Wajib. Furthermore, comma or period, he says, and this is one of the 3 ways of making tahallul, coming out of the ihram state on the 10th day. Coming out of the ihram state, the different things that were unlawful and prohibited before, some of those things, all of those things, most of those things are now lawful if you do some of these things on the 10th day. We're not going to go back and explain everything again if some of the brothers are lost or clueless. We've explained Hajj, we've done classes on Hajj workshops too many times. We have to move forward. So if you don't know what the 10th day is, Yawm al-Nahar, if you don't know what tahallul is, then it's not much we can do. What's important is, on the 10th day, how do you get back into your normal clothes? My arms and legs are chafing. I want to wear deodorant. Huh? I want to cover my head. My bald spot is bothering me, making me insecure. Right? I want to wear socks. My feet are cold or hot. Right? I want to wear underwear. Now, I want to hug and kiss my wife, or whatever it is. Whatever it is, my fingernails need to be trimmed, right? How do I now make the tahallul from the ihram state to the halal state? Making Jamrat al-Aqaba, stoning it, is what? One of those ways. And he says, and there are 3. Doing that, Jamrat al-Aqaba, on the day of Nahar, making tawaf al-ifada, the tawaf of Hajj, along with the sa'i. Not qudum, not wada, but the actual Hajj tawaf with the sa'i. And of course, anyone who's made Hajj knows that that day is going to be extremely packed in the Masjid al-Haram. Right or wrong? Packed, wall to wall. Everyone is going to be there. Number 3 is shaving. It's shaving. Tayyib. Based off of those who say that the shaving is actually a part of the ibadah. And we've explained that before. Some ulama say it's not the ibadah. Some say it's just, removal of the hair, etc., etc. Tayyib. Moving forward. So therefore, let's say a person doesn't stone Jamratul Aqaba until all the tashriq days are over. Tashriq being 11th, 12th, and the 13th. His Hajj will be valid, but he must offer sacrifice. And that's because he left off a what? Wajib of Hajj. Not a shart, not a rukn, but wajib of Hajj. Moving forward. Nawawi rahimahullah says, and this was the view of Imam Shafi'i and most of the scholars. Some of Malik's disciples, they said, Rami, stoning, isn't wajib, but it's rukn. It's a pillar of Hajj. And obviously, if you leave off the pillar, no Hajj. It's no Hajj. Tayyib. Ibn Jarir al-Tabari rahimahullah, he says that some people, some scholars, some of the people of the past, they said, is that Ramyul Jimar, stoning the Jamarat, isn't necessarily obligatory and mandatory itself, but it's a part of the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar during the days of Tashriq. So if a person makes takbir and he doesn't stone, then there's no sin upon him. That's the view of some of the scholars. And that was also the view of Aisha, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the Prophet ﷺ's wife, our mother. No, he says the correct view, the valid view, the strongest view is what we've previously explained, is that it is wajib from the wajibat of Hajj. Khairan, and once again, showing you how the scholars of Islam from among the Salaf to the later generations differed. And that your job as a talibul ilm and as a layman making Hajj is to learn the basic, simple, one view and stick with that. Until instructed otherwise, until you have to ask someone otherwise. You stick with the what? Basic, simple view. You don't get into these differences, these technicalities. You go with the alim, the student of knowledge in your camp that you trust, and you bismillah. Student of knowledge who has a bigger appetite, a more sensitive palate, different story. Why aren't you doing this, akhi? We didn't see you stone. Well, jazakallahu khairan. You don't know what I know. You haven't studied what I studied. My opinion, I don't have to stone. I follow this. Back of that. Layman Muslim, respect it. Don't argue, don't fight, don't curse. You're deviant, your Hajj is invalid because there are levels of knowledge. All right, moving forward. Another fa'idah from this chapter is that the Jamarat should be stoned with 7 pebbles. Not rocks or boulders, but pebbles. And that's also agreed upon by the ulama. And of course, there are many other branches and issues within that. Do you have to throw stones? Can you throw something else? Does it have to be 7? Can you throw 21 all at once? It's a mas'ala. Can you throw all of them all at once? Or do you have to individually? Wahakadha. Also, is the recommendation of making the takbir with every pebble that you throw. That's from the sunnah. And that's our madhab and the madhab of Malik and most of the ulama. Most of the ulama. قال القاضي وأجمعوا على أنه لو ترك التكبير لا شيء عليه. Qadi Iyad, may Allah have mercy upon him, he says, the scholars unanimously agree, if you stoned without making the takbir, then there's no sin upon you. No itham, no dam, nothing. ومن استحباب كون الرمي من بطن الوادي فيستحب أن يقف تحتها في بطن الوادي فيجعل مكة عن يساره ومنا عن يمينه ويستقبل العقبة والجمرة ويرميها بالحصيات السبع وهذا هو الصحيح في مذهبنا وبه قال جمهور العلماء. Another fa'idah from this chapter is stoning the jamrah from the middle of the valley. It's recommended to be in the middle. He says, يَقِفْ تَحْتَهَا, under it, beneath it. Now, is that possible today? With the crowds, with the constructions, with the concrete, with the ramps, so on and so forth. He says here, so Mecca should be on the left side. He says, فَيَجْعَلُ مَكَّةَ عَنْ يَسَارِهِ. Mecca should be where? On the left side. And Mina should be on the right side, and you should be facing the Aqaba, facing the Jamrah. Not from a different angle, that's recommended. Make Mecca on the left, Mina on the right, and face the Jamrah. And then you stone. He says, and this is the correct view, and this is the view of Shafi'i school, and most of the ulama. وقال بعض أصحابنا يستحب أن يقف مستقبل الجمرة مستديرا مكة. Some Shafi'i scholars, some of them say, rather it's recommended to face the Jamrah and have Mecca at one's back. To have one's back towards Mecca and facing the Jamrah. وقال بعض أصحابنا يستحب أن يقف مستقبل الكعبة وتكون الجمرة عن يمينه. Others, they say, rather one should face the Kaaba and the Jamrah should be on his right side. وَالصَّحِيحُ الْأَوَّلُ. And the correct view is the first view. Meaning all of these different views and opinions of these different fuqaha are against these texts. Did they know about those hadiths? Maybe they had other hadiths. What's important is they're against these what? Clear texts. And this is how the Prophet did it. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he swore by Allah, this is how he did it. And the Prophet only made Hajj one time. Moving forward. وَأَجْمَعُوا عَلَى أَنَّهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ رَمَاهَا جَازَا. The scholars unanimously agree from any direction or angle in which you stone, it's lawful. Because it's only something which is recommended. But it's not to be scorned. If you can do it the right, proper, polished way, then do it the right, proper, polished way. Too crowded, you get confused, I don't know which direction is which, then you what? Stone it. Moving forward. سواء استقبلها أو جعل عن يمينه أو عن يساره أو رماها من فوقها أو أسفلها أو وقف في وسطها ورماها. وأما رمي باقي الجمرات في أيام التشريق فيستحب من فوقها. So whether you have it on your right, your left, in front, and back, from above, from below, it doesn't matter. But it's recommended to do as we have explained. And as far as the rest of the Jamarat, during the 11th, 12th, and 13th day, then he says, min fawqiha. It should be from above. It should be from above. Khairan, inshallah. Moving forward. He says, قال القاضي عياض إن كان الحجاج أراد بقوله كما ألفه جبريل تأليف الآية في كل سورة ونظمها على ما هو عليه الآن في المصحف وهو إجماع المسلمين وأجمع أن ذلك تأليف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن كان يريد تأليف السورة إلى أن قال. He speaks on the arrangement of the Mus'haf, how the Mus'haf was arranged and compiled, what order, Baqarah, Ali Imran, Nisa, the ayat. In other words, that's pertaining to the story of the leader, Hajjaj, who was giving the khutbah and he was correcting people and repudiating people, keep the Quran in the order in which Jibreel gave it or made it. That's not mentioned in the versions of Bukhari and Muslim. Those wordings are mentioned in Sahih Muslim. That's why we're reading the Sharh Nawawi. What's important is hadith number 817. Hajjaj is the ruler. And Hajjaj, he says here, the surah in which Baqarah is mentioned. The surah in which Ali Imran is mentioned. The surah in which this is mentioned. And Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he said what? What did he call it? Surah al-Baqarah. And he doesn't say it's the surah in which, but he actually called it Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Nisa, Surah Al-Imran. And that's an issue in itself. What can or can you not say about the Quran? Can you say, I forgot the Quran? Okay, or do you have to say, I was made to forget the Quran? Can it be called Surah Al-Baqarah? Or does it have to be called the surah in which Baqarah is mentioned? That's what Hajjaj said. The leader, and we all know Hajjaj was famous and infamous. All of the different things that took place during his reign, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. What's important is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he wasn't what? He was not scared or afraid to speak the truth. The leader says something, Ibn Mas'ud says, I swear by Allah, this is what took place in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The leader is saying something publicly on the minbar, Ibn Mas'ud, what? He says, well, I'm sticking to what I know. And that is, the Messenger of Allah got this, and he called it, waqida. So the faida here, the permissibility of calling something from the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Fil. And you don't have to say the chapter in which the fil is mentioned, but the actual chapter of the elephant, chapter of the heifer, chapter of the bee, chapter of wahakadha, right? Tayyib. And of course, that's a long discussion with regards to politics and government. What is the way of the Salaf al-Salih with regards to rulers? Making dua for the ruler, for Allah to guide him, not making dua against him, and joining the good, forbidding the evil, giving him advice in private and secret, or can it be done publicly? Is that considered khuruj? Or is the way of the Salaf to just be deaf, dumb, and blind? Don't say anything about life, society, the country. The ruler says this is wrong, the Quran is like this has to be changed, the rules are reformed, this secular, kada, and the ulama should just what? Hear no evil, see no evil, turn away. Is that the way of the Salaf? Did the Sahaba have that view in which they kept silent and turned a blind eye? That's a long, sticky discussion. What's important is nothing should be attributed to the Salaf except for that which they did and that which they understood. Nothing foreign or alien is to be attributed to them. Even if it's right. Even if it's right. But this took place, this happened, this was adopted in the 6th century, the 5th century, the 8th century. You don't say what? The Salaf al-Salih. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said, he explained, he concluded, he said this is impermissible to say this because of this and that. And that may be what? Correct. But you can't now say that's what? Aywa. Unless you have the athar in which the Salaf said that, or they behaved in a manner which proves that was their understanding and their consensus. And that's a huge problem. And the way of the Salaf is going to be mentioned one or two ways. Number one, clear consensus from a reliable source stating the Salaf agreed upon. The Sahaba agreed upon. Ibn Mas'ud said it, no one else differed with him on the minbar publicly, openly. It was well known and established. And it's clearly mentioned, we agreed. We sat, وهكذا. Or, النقل المستفيض المشهور عنهم, as the mass reports. We have 10 different athar from 10 different tabi'een, 10 different Sahaba, all saying the same thing. This is what they did, this is what they didn't do, this is how they understood it. As far as the view and the opinion of 1 or 2 or 3 sporadically, that is not what? The madhab of the Salaf, let alone the ijtihad of an alim or scholars that came later on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be wrong. But that's not what? The way of the Salaf al-Salih. Do you understand? Their way is what they did and what they said and what they understood and how they behaved, period. And that is to remain sacred. No infringements upon that. Do not attribute things to them that they didn't do or say or understand or practice. That's wrong. And that's a huge problem today. So many people, they think and they say, well, this is the way of the Salaf. Where? Show them Ibn Abi Shayba, Musannaf Abd Razak, Tafsir Tabari. Where is it at? Where are they? Sheikh Fulan said it. Sheikh Tayyib, Jazakallah khairan. That's what Sheikh Fulan said. Hundreds of years later, not what they said. Let alone if these different statements and opinions were only made because of political pressure or political influence. or the nature of life today. Church and state being separated, right? So be careful. And there are many different ramifications of this. And there's some ayats and some hadiths in which you can barely find the true way because it's been coded and covered up by so many layers of the modern times, and which is hard to find what they really said about something. Those who know what I'm saying and what I'm talking about know, and those who don't know, they don't know. What's important is Ibn Mas'ud did not agree with Hajjaj. He did not keep silent upon what Hajjaj said. He stuck with his guns, and that was wahi. The Prophet ﷺ got it like this on this day. That's where he stoned. That was the name of the surah. What Fulan and Fulan leader says, I don't know. It doesn't concern me. I'm not standing in front of Allah on the day of judgment with that. Right? Wallahu ta'ala alam. And this also goes to show us, in the time of Hajjaj, with all of the things that Hajjaj did and his crimes, Hajjaj actually was a leader of the Muslims. And he spoke and he addressed the Muslims. Not like how things are today. Okay? In which the Imam Ahmed, for example, and others, they mention wal-Jihadu ma'adin ma'al imma barru and fajaru. Okay? That jihad will be continuous with all rulers, wicked or pious. Paying zakat to them, continuous, wicked or pious. Making hajj behind them, continuous, wicked or pious. Praying behind them, Jum'ah, wal-A'yad. They mention this, Eids, Jum'ah, congregational prayers, with the rulers. The rulers today, do they lead people in hajj? Do they lead people in jihad? Do they lead people in salah? Do they speak and give the khutbah? So you see how the past and the present is what? It's a separation. And there are people who try to make things connected without the rest of the connections. That's a mushkila. You get the point I'm trying to make? It's no longer organic now. Rather, there's GMO. And the people unjustly attribute the genetic stuff, the genetically modified stuff, to the organic way. And they say that's the way of the Salaf. Well, what about this? And what about that? And he clearly mentioned the things that the rulers are supposed to do, even if they're wicked, such as Hajjaj. Hajjaj was speaking, right? So that's reflection and food for thought. Say whatever you want to say, use whatever name you want to use. It doesn't matter, it doesn't change anything. Whatever name or title that you give a person, right? For trying to think and actually read what's there. We'll stop here tonight. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should knows best. Sallallahu sallam wa barak ala abdihi wa rasulihi nabina wa imamina Muhammad. Inshallah, we'll start the questions. Yeah, you can start again, inshallah.